Hey everybody, so I don't normally do two videos in one day, but like so many of the rest of you, I am whiling away the coronavirus hours, so I'm looking for things to do. And anyway, got a few questions that came in on my last video about religious faith, and the you know it's interesting. I actually wanted to take a stab at answering some of these, and it's interesting, especially to me, because like I see myself in so many of these, and or my old self in so many of these. So I wanted to take a stab at answering some of them, so I don't just seem like I'm dodging questions or trying to be mysterious. Now that said, I am in no way, shape, or form trying to turn this channel into some kind of channel for theocratic discussion or advocacy or anything like that. This is just to answer the question and then the questions, and then also you know try to articulate these answers as best I can, to better understand where I stand on these things. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that in all of this, I'm giving you an answer that's satisfactory to me, not an answer that's satisfactory to you. You may find it satisfactory, but it's ultimately it's ultimately the ultimate answer I'm giving you is where I stand, not trying to give you something that's going to change your mind. So if it doesn't change your mind, just shake the dust off your sandals and go on. And also, I'll reiterate, I'm not trying to change your mind. I don't want to change your mind. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of being any kind of like missionary or converting people or witnessing or anything like that. I just want to see if I can answer these questions and also kind of think aloud on these topics. So, man with a penis. These are all from the comments section of my last video. So, man with a penis says, I guess it's an appropriate time to ask since you mentioned your conversion to Christianity. I would pause to emphasize it's a process. I don't believe you should say you are a Christian until you've taken baptism. But anyway, uh, your conversion to Christianity. I read your book Eros Empire about a month ago. It was enjoyable. I liked it very much. Thank you. I have to ask how your opinions on porn have changed, if at all, since you took this road towards Christianity. So, my answer would be not at all. And I think that Christians like Melvin Crankshadow, who is the villain in Eros Empire, are just as contemptible now as I did beforehand. Those people are hypocritical. They are snake oil salesmen. They're just trying to make a quick buck off the back of gullible and impressionable rubes. And religion has, of course, been a wonderful uh, instrument for accomplishing that through the years. As far as my views on, I think the only thing that the only thing I could go to that have changed. There's a scene at the beginning, or a scene in chapter 2 of Eros Empire where Isaac Alston is laying out some questions to his son to explain why he's not a Christian, and it's questions like how things that were questions I had as an atheist, like how were Adam and Eve supposed to know that eating the fruit of the that gave them the knowledge of good and evil was wrong if they didn't have the knowledge of good and evil. It's questions like that. I would say that I have a perspective on that now. I still think those are valid questions to ask. I won't get off into the weeds on that particular topic, but I do have an answer. I do have perspective on that. That said, like I said, ultimately my views on people and the absurdity of human behavior hasn't really changed. So, yes, that part of it remains the same. As far as my views on porn, I have no problem with porn. I have no problem with premarital sex. It may be the only sex I ever had or ever have. The but and the Episcopal Church was founded originally so that Henry VIII could get a divorce. So it's always historically had a fairly liberal stance on sexuality. Uh, the thing, bringing it into a spiritual context, bringing the subject of sex into a spiritual context, I like to look at, there's a passage in the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis where he makes the point that it is not the pleasure in and of itself which is bad. The pleasure itself is not bad. Sexuality is not at all wrong. Lewis was arguing that sex should be confined to marriage, but still building on that idea, he says in the Screwtape Letters, God created the pleasures. Satan, he defines Satan as an entity which corrupts the good, so a corrupting force. So the Satan himself cannot actually create the pleasures; he can only corrupt the pleasures. And Lewis uses the example of alcohol, and says that think about it. Drinking alcohol in and of itself is not evil. It goes in your body, you drink it, you consume it, you evacuate it, that's it. The question you need to ask yourself is why you're drinking the alcohol. Are you drinking the alcohol because you want to, you are having a wonderful social gathering with friends? Lewis himself started the Inklings, which was essentially a writers' drinking group. Are you having a wonderful time with friends, celebrating life, enjoying life, feeling good? Is this a positive, wonderful feeling? Is it making your life better? Are you happier as a result of doing this? Are you drinking as having drink as a part of this thing that's good and life affirming and positive? Or are you drinking because you're trying to numb the pain? Are you drinking to escape from the world? Are you drinking to deal with your problems or make your problems go away? See, these are two very different tracks that you can get on drinking alcohol. That's the question, and I think that fundamentally is the question that we have to ask in all of these things. Jesus said it's not what goes into the body, but what comes out that makes you unclean. And using the process of digestion and elimination as a metaphor for the idea that, and in so doing and saying that, he declared all foods to be clean, which I have to think, keeping pace with that, he probably said other things that nullified the rest of Leviticus. But the idea being that it's not what you consume, it's what you do with it. It's what comes out of you as a result that makes you a good person, a better person, or a lesser person, that kind of thing. So as regards human sexuality, the question comes back to being very, very consciously aware on a spiritual level of why you are having a sexual encounter with somebody. Are you having a sexual encounter because it's making, I would say pay attention to how you feel afterwards. Do you feel better? Do you feel uplifted? Do you feel exalted? Do you feel positive? Is your life getting better? Are you happier? If so, then you are probably on the right track. Or are you getting angry and irritable and miserable and pissed off and all this? One of the things that people have noticed about the so-called pickup artist community is that a lot of these guys have this they don't seem to like women very much. They have this very, very angry, miserable, and they don't seem to like sex very much either. They have this very angry, miserable attitude about it. And it's because they've driven themselves into the ground trying to use sex as a means of personal validation in a very empty and shallow and superficial way, and it's just making them more and more miserable. So that's the question. Those are the questions that we need to ask. The fundamental difference between, in my mind, between what Jesus brought and what was originally being taught by the Hebrews was originally the Old Testament was an attempt to get the Hebrews to straighten up and fly right. So, they needed a lot, to when you're trying to command and guide a whole group of people that, you have to remember the context in which this is coming out and this is being handed down. It's not like today where we have hospitals and medical knowledge and all this stuff. It's more like you step out of line once and you drop dead. It's kind of like like on Family Guy, it was Peter says, "Well, I got bit by a mosquito. It was nice knowing you." That kind of thing. It's that sort of, it's that environment. So yeah, you need this very strict set of laws that people are never ever going to step out of. Jesus represents a fundamental change from how does God relate to society to how does God relate to the individual. Let's take it from you follow these rules or else, and take it to personal growth. how can we make your life better? How can we make you a better, fuller, richer person? That's the fundamental shift. And it's a fundamental shift that I think a lot of atheists ignore, and understandably so, because the Christians that they're responding to are the power mad, power hungry Christians. The ones that want to take over the schools and take over the government and everything else, that have somehow convinced themselves this is a Christian nation when in reality it's anything but. All of that, those people. So I understand where you're getting that perspective from. Also, the idea of sexuality in general, Jesus had very little to say about it, and most of what we get in the New Testament comes from the Apostle Paul. And without getting into the minute specifics, there are a few things. For example, when he says sexual immorality, avoid sexual immorality, or abstain from sexual immorality, the word he's using in the Greek is porneia, which just means unlawful sexuality. So he's basically saying, don't break the law. Don't go rape people. Don't harass people. Don't hurt people. That makes more sense. The other, it's kind of like when he says, there will be these passages where he says things like, he admonishes slave drivers and warmongers and murderers and homosexuals. It's like, wait a minute. That seems kind of weird that he's putting homosexuals in the same camp as slave drivers and mass murderers and all of this stuff. And and then you actually look into the historicity of it. The word homosexual didn't exist until the 19th century. The original term that Paul was using was abusers of men. And and abusers of men makes a little more sense, because what he was actually writing in response to, was the depravity of the Roman Empire. And it was a common practice among Roman soldiers to rape the men of the army that they were conquering. And that's what he's referring to. He's saying, don't go rape men. Yeah, fine, no problem with that. So a lot of this, what we think of as morality around sexuality in the Bible, has been the result of just interpretation throughout the years and throughout the generations, and various power-hungry people, or people pushing specific agendas, try to lean on certain passages and that kind of thing. But to me, I think that my personal belief is that if you appeal to a higher power in all questions, those questions will be answered to you in a manner that becomes apparent to you over time. And your conscience is a voice that will guide you, and that is what you need to be thinking about. Is thinking about more like not if I put my dick in this, am I going to hell? That's the wrong perspective. It's more like, is this making my life better? Is this making the other person's life better? Or however many people are involved, is this making us better? Are we happier? How do we feel about this? What path are we on in life? Those are the questions. And ultimately, I don't see that as contrasting with Eros Empire at all. I don't see that as a problem. I think just like the point I made in the book, there are some people who are cut out to be in the porn industry. That is, their gift is the way they look, the fact that they enjoy having sex on camera, that these are their natural gifts. This is where they ought to be. This is what makes them happy. For those people, good. Do it. Enjoy it. It's making you better. There are people who try it and realize it's not for them, and to them I would say, get the hell out. So that's where I stand. Ultimately, no great change there. And then moving on to, let's see. A few people like this Carl Meaner person didn't really write in with a question, but he just, writing in with kind words, and thank you for that. Let's see. Blabby102 says, R.I.P. Richard, honest question. When you say that you will not abandon the realities we understand through the scientific method for the sake of my religious faith, what about times when your faith goes against science? Do you throw out those parts of Christianity? No, my faith doesn't go against science. It comes down to a matter of understanding what it is you're reading, and there's two very specific things. Robert Barron, who I criticized in a previous video, but also mentioned he's given me in his videos a lot of good ideas and a lot of good insights. He makes a really good point that in the Bible, you have to understand when you are, the Bible is not one book, it's a library. And so you have to understand when you're in the history section, when you're in the poetry section, when you're in the fantasy section, the horror section, all of the stuff, the political, poli sci section, and all of that. It's a collection of a compendium of ideas, not one book, not one specific book. And so, knowing that, you have to also saying that gives you some perspective. So do I actually think Jonah survived in the belly of the whale? No, I think that's a story that's a fable that's told to make a point. That kind of thing. Just like I don't think there's any historical evidence for Noah's Ark. I don't think there was actually a literal Adam and Eve. I think that we evolved over time. I think Adam and Eve are a metaphor for how we, coming into consciousness as human beings, realizing what, the fundamental thing that sets human beings apart from animals is our sentience and our ability to communicate our thoughts and convey our thoughts and our desires and manifest those in the world in a way that is ongoing. There are certain creatures, like everyone has probably seen the videos of how crows can make hooks to pick things up. They naturally know how to make hooks. Beavers naturally know how to make dams, all of that stuff. But we humans have an extraordinary gift that places us kind of halfway between lower animals and the transcendent creative forces of the universe. And so that's where we find ourselves, and those Old Testament stories are metaphors to understand that. The fundamental question that a Christian has to grapple with is not the historicity of the Bible. Nowhere is a Christian required to think that the Bible is historically accurate, and that's where all of these creation science assholes get off completely on the wrong foot. It's this idea of, like, if we can't prove that there was literally a Garden of Eden, that there was literally Adam and Eve, that we, never mind that if we descended from two people, we'd be so hopelessly inbred by now that it'd be impossible to function. But anyway, I don't think anyone I'm preaching to here or talking to here actually believes in that. Christians are not called on to believe that the whole Bible is historically true. That is not the requirement, the fundamental requirement of Christianity. That's Judaism, and not even the Jews believe, not even all sects of Judaism believe that the Old Testament is historically true. So no, that to all of that stuff, and that's where I would say to a lot of atheists, your discussion about Christianity, I think, has been limited to a reactionary movement reacting to Christianity and this kind of fire and brimstone Christianity, and I'm still just as opposed to that as I ever was. I don't think that it's loving or compassionate to beat people over the head with horrifying stories of hell and damnation. I think it's much better to lift them up, and hell is something that everyone can discover on their own in this life if they want to. So it's certainly more helpful I think, to help people and build them up and work on making their lives better. And that's my goal and my focus. I don't mean to sound like I'm I don't mean to sound like I'm running some kind of ministry or preaching or something, but I say, like, that's what I think is better to focus on. So the fundamental question of Christianity is that is accepting Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior, or at the very least the physical embodiment of the Lord and Savior. And to that end, I don't view anything that happened there as contradictory to science, simply because I know that the relatively few pages of text, ultimately speaking, that make up the Bible, it's a collection of observations from people that were writing from within the confines of the knowledge they had at the time. And one of the things and one of the questions that arises, so I say that because they are not going to be able to fully describe and fully engage and fully express everything that was going on. Um, the And so I think that there is a lot more to it than what we understand, and a lot of atheists and what was documented in the Bible, and a lot of atheists would come back at that and say, well, why didn't God just tell everybody everything that he wanted them to know up front? Well, two things. One, that would take all the living out of life. And two, it wouldn't, it would have, I think if you had fully explained if everything were fully explained, it would just sound like noise. It would sound like nonsense. I mean, it would sound. I mean, it would just sound. It would be incomprehensible to just like Okay, I'll put it this way. I'll put it to you like this. Uh, there's a great book. I actually we did an episode of it on Book Talk. It's the podcast that I do. It's called Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers, and the idea is that it's a future world where aliens have landed at various points all over the Earth, and they have left. They've departed from the planet when the story begins, and the reason it's called Roadside Picnic is the aliens have left all of these artifacts behind, and the they've left all these artifacts behind, and humans are now trying to take these artifacts and make some kind of sense of them. What are these containers, these containment units, and these like battery things, and all this, like trying to figure out what these weird devices are that are laying around, and all these weird pieces of metal, and different things like that, different fragments of these alien crafts that were left behind when they took off. We're trying to figure out what it all is, and somebody makes a point in the book that says, imagine if you're driving through the woods, and you, on a dirt road, you're driving through the woods, and you stop and you have a roadside picnic. And you get out and you set up your picnic and your coffee maker and your little TV tray, and your your like portable toilet, or your lantern, and all of the campfire stuff. You set up all of that stuff, all that stuff, and you have your roadside picnic, and then you pack up and move on, and you leave behind a bunch of trash, and and a bunch of like plastic forks and that kind of thing, and napkins and all that stuff. And the animals come and they look at what you left behind. They're going to look at what you left behind and think, what the hell is this? What is all this? None of this makes sense. This is some kind of hyper advanced magical power of the human beings, the weird mysteries of the higher beings, and all this. That's going to be the animal perspective, and your perspective is going to be, no, it's just some trash we left behind. And the same thing as we're examining all of this weird detritus that was left behind by the aliens. That to them it was just, no, we had a roadside picnic. There's no great meaning to any of it. By the same token, what you have in the Bible, I think, with the story of Jesus and the people who are documenting his existence on this earth, people who were trying to make sense of something that was way, way beyond them and way beyond their understanding. So when I hear about things in the story of Jesus, which again, that's the thing, I feel like that's the only part of the Bible that I need to grapple with in a historical context. When there's stuff in there that appears to defy the scientific method, to me, it was being written by people who not only people who were not as advanced as we are today, but people who were not advanced for the time that they were living in, and they were simple salt of the earth people that were chosen. God chooses imperfect people to represent him because no other kind of person exists, and so these people were trying to follow and trying to make sense of things that things that didn't totally make sense to them. And I think there's things that were being described there that were even further beyond what they could describe. And so it's kind of, I don't want to go off into, I don't want to be the whoever the, I can't think of his name, the guy on the History Channel. We all seen the meme where he's going aliens. I don't want to be like that guy, but you know, it's things like you know, things like that. Like they're observing things that don't totally make sense to them, and they're trying to describe it with the language they had then. So then the question, why doesn't God just give us the right language? Well, it would have sounded like nonsense. Like the human race has to live through all of this to get to the point that we are now to understand things in the terms we use now. So there are a lot of questions and mysteries there. But to me, those mysteries are it's a promise of greater understanding and greater things to come, rather than greater understandings to come and things that will hopefully will be made apparent, rather than a stumbling block. That that is why it's not a contradiction, and not a contradiction for me. And that's, again, that's the thing. It's like you need to be very conscious of not assuming that your interpretation of what it's about is what it's going to be about for everybody. If that helps. Uh, yeah. Uh, Great Helm says, "Yeah, I was an atheist back in the early YouTube atheist days. Now I'm a Christian. Atheism seems more like a prolonged teenage rebellion phase more than anything. DPR Jones was one of the more reasonable ones. May he rest in peace." I there's some truth to that. You know, I remember Venom Fang X, to use the name. I remember he actually described his experience as an atheist as being that it felt like the last day of school. And to a certain extent, I understand that. I understand where it's coming from. Um, I it's less like a rebellion phase for me. It was more like best metaphor I can come up with is, it just, over time, I realized it felt like it's like, like, felt like I was holding this door shut inside of me. Like there was this door inside of me that I was just holding shut and doing everything in my power to hold it shut. And eventually, I just decided I wasn't going to hold the door shut anymore. And that wasn't conversion, instantaneous conversion to something that, to Christianity or anything like that. I just decided I wasn't going to hold that door shut anymore. Um, I guess it's kind of like clench a fist really, really tight, as tight as you possibly can. After a while, you're going to want to let go of that fist, and someone's going to come along and say, "Well, why don't you unclench your fist? It's obviously hurting your hand. You're not happy. You're just holding onto it with all of your might and clenching your fist as hard as you can." And you say, "Well, yeah, but if I unclench this fist, then I'm going to be a different person." And you're like, "No, you're not. Unclench your fist." That was it. Anyway, Chuck Jeff says, "So weird that you would go from being an atheist to some denomination of Christianity. I understand when people start believing there may well be a creating force in the universe, but to go to some wacky story of a God sending his son to spread the word person to person at the same time a lot of other religions were started, then take part in some kind of sacrifice ritual, how would ever come to believe in that? Maybe it's time for you to address your underlying mental health problems rather than joining a cult." Um, so this statement, it's interesting to me. So you're willing to go you're willing to take a certain step and say that you think that there's a creative force to the universe, but you're not willing to go, but then it comes to a certain point, and, oh, well, that must be mental illness. The part that you're comfortable with, that's rational, but the rest of it, that must be mental illness. Um, so again, this comes down to kind of like taking the questions that you're having about faith and I assuming that these are irrefutable arguments that people of faith are just ignoring, I guess, is what you're doing. But I wanted to bring this up because this really sounds like the kind of thing that I used to, back in my the glory days of my atheism and everything, the kind of shit that I used to say to people, and I really regret it. Accusing people of being mentally ill because they have religious faith. This was actually a question that I grappled with, which was that this was a question that I grappled with early on in my days of my faith, where I was like, well, what's the difference between faith and mental illness? And somebody said it perfectly, and I love this. Just somebody in a Facebook comment said, faith is believing that the universe has a plan. Mental illness is believing you know what it is. And I think that's ultimately it. I think, it's one thing to be open to an understanding with the higher power of the universe. It's another thing to think what that higher power wants, what the worldwide plan for everybody is. That's the big difference. That's why, like I say, I'm not interested in proselytizing. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I think everybody has to, ultimately, they have to go through that on their own. If somebody comes to me and says, do you think I should convert to Christianity? I'm going to say, well, it's helped me a lot. I think it would help you. I encourage you to find your own path, and find what works for you. And if you find something that works as well for you as this has for me, then do that. Go for that. And so, as far as the thing about the supposed parallels between Jesus and other people, yes, lots of people were showing up at the time claiming to be the Jewish Messiah. That's why, even in the Old Testament text, there are people arguing about, well, could he be the one the prophecies told of? Just the fact that there were other people trying to, other pretenders to the throne, if you will, doesn't mean that this one is not the correct one. So that used to be a stumbling block for me back when I was an atheist. I used to think, oh well, there were all these other Messiah figures trying to do the same thing or claiming to do the same thing, and I thought, well, this could have just been the one that did it correctly. So that again, the fundamental difference is this is the one that was put to death and raised again from the dead. That's the fundamental point. And people will say, well, there's no scientific proof that somebody could have completely died and come back from the grave. I say, yeah, that's why it's called faith. I have it's a process coming to understand that. That's a whole other discussion, but at the end of the day, it's just not a stumbling block for me. And then the last one, Lola Twinkle. Lola, you have commented on my videos a lot throughout the years, so I wanted to take time to respond to this. Says, what the fuck? What is wrong with you guys? What is it with Christianity? Don't you think you could be a good person without... Pardon me. Don't you think you can be a good person without religion? I am so disappointed. DPRJ would be... sure would be too, though he wouldn't say. He just died, and already you're ascribing you're ascribing judgment to your saintly figure. Anyway, bollocks to the scientific method, Owen. There is nothing scientific in believing made-up bullshit, and shame on you for using DPRJ Memorial video to say it. Shame on you. What I was trying to say was, I was trying to say this from, pay tribute to someone that was a friend, someone that I liked, someone that I think was ultimately a positive force in the world, and pay tribute. I thought I had something unique as a perspective to offer. Is why I did that. I thought that there's something, that might be something worth adding as somebody that's come around to faith, that could contribute to that and would be a more unique person, certainly, to think, well, here is a spiritual person that's also paying tribute. That's all I thought. Shame on me. I don't believe that I've done anything shameful. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, ultimately, and Lola, I know you've been very much a supporter over the years, and I respect that. I appreciate that. But I will say, the thing is, it you sound exactly like a religious fanatic when you say things like this. You know that nothing. There's nothing scientific in believing made up bullshit. That I've been speaking about this for a while, but a while now. But we believe all kinds of made up bullshit. What do you think philosophy is? But people sitting around uh, conjecturing about how they think the nature of the universe and society and politics and all of these things function. That's what philosophy is. Um, Theology ultimately is just a dimension of philosophy that says that there's going there or it's a perspective on philosophy that says there's a dimension of understanding that's outside what we have access to now. I mean, ultimately, that's it. And so we all find some kind of philosophy and some kind of set of ideas that are going to give us a bearing on the world. We all believe made up bullshit. At the end of the day, and one of the things um, somebody Whiskey Vargas says, "Why do you people get so mad and offended like this? Sounds like you got rabies. Seek help with your hateful behavior." That's the thing, man. When I was an atheist, I would have done the same thing that she did right there, and it just I am willing to, you know, to get out of that mindset, that hateful, knee jerk, furious, foaming at the mouth mindset. I'm willing to risk the chance of dying and the lights go off and I don't exist anymore and none of this, and I was wrong about all of this. I'm willing to risk that possibility if it means that there is something that has a psychological device that has guided me out of that kind of behavior. So anyway, and there, by the way, there are. I'm not singling out atheists here. There are Christians and every other religious faith that are every bit that bad, but spirituality ultimately has been something that's allowed me to go into myself and really dig through the closet. And and clean everything up in here, and I'm still working on cleaning everything up, but that's where it's at. Anyway, hopefully I've made some sense.